host, Ivan Troxel, podcast creator and director of TRXL Media. And if you are in AEC Tech, you can't afford to miss his podcast. He has hosted some amazing people in the industry, his interviewing style, breaking down the complex topics into easily understandable ways, super useful. So thanks a lot, Ivan, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time coming. I think we've been trying to get together like this for you were on my show previously, but me coming on your show has been difficult to schedule. So I thank you for your patience, Mayor.
I'm glad we could do this and appreciate your time. So, Ivan, if I'm being honest, you give me a vibe where you just love hosting, interviewing. You have other podcasts as well. TRXL is the new one. Tell me what excites you the most about this space.
Oh, well, it's definitely the people behind all of the technology that excite me the most and just kind of the characters and the passion that's there. Um, my goal with the Troxel podcast is really to tell the stories about the people who are making things happen with technology and architecture. And the technology is secondary to that for sure. I'm much more interested in why those people are doing what they're doing more than what they're actually doing, right? So that's just secondary. These people have amazing stories, they have amazing experiences, and my goal with the show was always to allow more people to be a fly on the wall during that conversation because these conversations happen all the time and they happen at lots of different conferences and in conference rooms, in offices and at lunch. And there was so many times where I was like, "Oh my gosh, there's just so much being shared here. What if we could make this, a recording and put it out there?" And so obviously we've gone through some more formalizing steps to do that. But even stepping back from that and creating a bigger resource that has categories and keywords and transcripts and all of these other, things that I can do to kind of back it up and make long form interviews searchable, for example, right? Because before AI, that was a really difficult thing to do. Like find a piece in the video where the guest talked about that thing that you remember. It was really difficult. And so now with automatic transcriptions and just being able to actually go back and connect the dots between different episodes, even, has been a huge, I think, additional layer on top of all this that makes it even more useful for people if they're willing to kind of go down the rabbit hole of what I would consider the brightest minds in AEC technology.
Nice. And for me, it feels like this comes to you naturally, like talking to these people. And so, what's your processes of finding which talent to interview? Is it through discovery, through these conferences, your network?
Yeah, it just comes very organically. There's not like a strict process. Some people come to me, I go to others, I get recommendations from the audience. There's been a couple times where, like at the end of the year, I kind of do my own kind of wrap up process of what happened this year, and then I'll even just send an email to the guests who came onto the show and say, "Hey, who else should be on the show?" Because and it's just a natural way to kind of extend the network beyond who I may have access to, right? And then it allows them to make the introduction a lot of times. So to me, that's kind of a fundamental building block of how you build a network, right? Is you just start somewhere and then you build on that by asking who needs to hear, like not only just share it with an audience, but who else should be on the show. And no, they've never failed me. I mean, that has always proven to be really fruitful in developing content and different people to come onto the show to share.
Yeah, there was one side project idea I had because uh, a lot of times in the interviews, people share about pain points or insights of their own
Hmm.
work or in AC. And I was like,
Right.
what if I index all of your podcasts and
Hmm.
find what are the opportunities to build stuff? What are the pain
Right.
points commonly occurring? So it's also this becomes a whole knowledge library just on AC tech stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a goal of mine. We should work together on that. I think I've talked to you a little bit about some of those ideas before, right? Which is how do you make it easier for people to find what's going on in these shows and derive insights from them that maybe aren't sitting right on the surface, right? Or if you spaced out for those 10 seconds and you missed it, it's gone. Like you're never even
Mm,
going to go back and listen to it a second time, right? And so it seems to me like there's some opportunity there. And I think having a well-rounded guest list is really important when it comes to that because sometimes you'll have technology providers who really see things a certain way because that fits the narrative of the problem that they're solving. But then to have people from the practice side, like when you came on the show, you were working in the practice still, right? And you were a recent graduate and getting the insights and the perspectives of people from the different sides of the table, I think really helps round out what those potentials could be to do something like what you're talking about. Like you could actually mine that information for ideas. Totally.
yeah. Yeah, and it also becomes like a user research or like market research opportunity where, let's say
Right.
I just search construction project scheduling. It mines all the podcasts and sites. Here's where a speaker mentioned about it and corresponding pain point or solution which related to that idea, and that becomes, and these are like high funnel people, like the insights from them is will be like way more valuable than like a generic person. So because they have already evaluated a lot of softwares before, so
Right. Yep.
that's what is your goal for this year and next year with the podcast. Like, do you have KPIs? How do you measure? Yeah.
No. I don't pay attention to that stuff as much as possible. And that may sound insane from like a technological standpoint of you can't what's the terminology? It's like you can't make anything better if you don't measure it. But the idea of measuring it just sounds like uh the weeds that I don't want to get into. And
Mm,
so my goals are just to keep doing it. And my approach has always been just take one step at a time and really rely on the on the organic side of growth. And so when it comes to um the types of guests and things like that, it's really organic who comes onto the show and finding who those people are and who's going to come on next. Um, Finding sponsors to help, monetize the show so that it can continue is also a very organic thing. I handle all of it myself. I don't have a team that does it. And I try to create a very professional product from the
mm,
podcast, right? So I hope that kind of all of the values are aligning there so that people understand that they can reach a valuable audience through a valuable product, and that audience will reciprocate by actually listening to what people want to hear. So I kind of turned your question into kind of a monetization side of
mm,
things because that is the only thing that I'm doing right now, and it is an important part of continuing to do what I do. So I guess if I really think about it, like just talking out loud here with your question, I would like to make it more monetizable from that standpoint so that it can continue become to become the resource that I envision it to be.
yeah, and I think no one talks about this, about how to make a sustainable podcast
Mhm.
business, and
Well,
it's
everybody thinks it's just a side hustle and it'll be totally fine as a side hustle, right? And it absolutely could, I guess, if you have a main hustle. I just don't happen to have a main hustle. This is
mm,
my main hustle, so yeah.
nice. Yeah, and what would you do differently in case you were to start podcast again?
Hmm. I have no idea. I have no idea what I would do differently. I have never thought about that before because I've been doing it for so long. This podcast, the Troxel podcast that we're talking about, has been going on for almost 4.5 years. So it started in June of 2020, but I've been podcasting a lot longer since the end of 2012 with my Archispeak podcast. So that's a very long running architecture specific podcast that is more about what it's like to actually live and work in the profession of architecture. It's not technology based, although that topic does come up once in a while. And that audience is been around and followed us for a very long time because it's kind of been this continuous conversation between me and my co-host over going on 13 years now. So um, I can't. It's hard for me to answer what I would do differently. The technology has changed. It's so easy. We're doing it right now. I just click a link on a website. Here we are. You're streaming live to everybody. Um, I went to video 4 years ago when I started right after I started the Troxel podcast. I started doing video on YouTube as well. Just so I can meet users where they're at. If there's somebody already on YouTube with a YouTube account and they could subscribe, great. It's by far the smallest number of consumers of the podcast on the video version, right? But if you're have a web you have a tab open, I don't expect anybody to watch it, right? But if they have a tab open, they'll just throw it in the background and listen to the podcast that way. Um, if I were to do things differently, man, it's a really hard question to answer because it's just been such an iterative. I approach everything, Meyer, like a design problem because I'm an architect, I'm a designer. And when I was running digital practice at the firm that I was at, which is probably when we talked, that was a design problem, like how to actually implement a digital practice that has a technical strategy for technology. Um, because I come from a design background. My podcast is the same way. It's like I'm just constantly iterating on the design and trying something new. It could be any number of things, but so I think if I were to, okay, here we go. I'm finally getting there, Meyer. I would simplify it. You know, like you just hit go and it's broadcasting and there's no editing and it's just how it is, right? I would probably do something like you would do. Just simplify the process because there is a lot of effort that goes into creating that very professional, polished product that I talked about a
Mhm,
few minutes ago, right? I have an enormous database with everything that I've ever done in it so that I can potentially do more with it. But I also edit and I also make thumbnails and I also there's just so many pieces to the equation, right? I have to post it to YouTube, I have to post it to my podcast platform, I have to then it gets sent out to all the subscribers. There's an email, there's a post that goes on my website. There's all of these steps that what to me go into creating this thing, right?
mhm,
That it truly is kind of an outcome of Troxel Media, right? As that that's the company that I'm running, right? So, um, but I think if everybody really wants to, I think they should, pursue becoming some kind of media outlet for whatever they're working on. Um, you've got to kind of make it guerrilla style, right? Which I would say, it's just like, what can you do with your phone? What can you do with a basic camera microphone setup, but be putting useful information out into the world, not crap out into the world. And to me, that the goal of putting stuff out there is to get it out there as easily as you can so that you don't get stuck in that production process because I think that can become overwhelming for a lot of people who aren't willing to continue to do it that way. And there's no rule that says once you start doing it in a really polished way, you have to continue doing it. But I can't really imagine what I would do in like pulling the quality level back
mhm,
down a couple steps to make it easier for me because it's not about me. To me, it's about like what can I put out there that really will stand the test of time, even if the conversation can't stand the test of time. Like I still want to represent everybody in the best light possible and just set a high bar for quality. I would probably dial that back if I were to start
mhm.
over again. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, like I had this dilemma a while ago. Okay, I love hosting, I love talking to people, but I just don't have time and resource bandwidth to either outsource
Yeah.
editing or hire. So I just made that trade off for myself. And to the point, I really think this long form media is high leverage activity one could do, because the same can be cropped into multiple clips and can become like short form content. You can summarize in transcript, create a newsletter, or like there's so much or like a output from this one thing you could do. So it's uh like no brainer why one shouldn't do if they're interested in podcasting.
Absolutely. And I and while all that potential is there, oh my gosh, it's so much extra work.
Yeah.
The tools are making it way easier, but you still have to fine tune all that stuff because all of the kind of automated tools that exist to find clips, to make them the right length and kinda edit them down and reformat the video for
Yeah.
vertical and apply the transcripts to the screen, and it's because people don't wanna necessarily watch the video with audio on. There's a lot of steps in there, right? And as a designer, I just won't take what they give me. I wanna tweak
Mm,
it, and now you go down that rabbit hole of production of what it actually takes to do all that at my quality level. Again, like, you don't have to choose my
mm,
quality level, right? But you're right, like, it's right there waiting for that to happen, and at the same time, like, I've done it once in a while, and it's done extremely well, and at the same time, like, I have to think about what serves the audience, and
mm,
I'm not interested in people who are only going to sit through a minute of these long form conversations. The whole point of me doing this podcast is so that we can have long form conversations and see where the conversation goes. Like I never write questions out and send those to the guests so that they know what we're going to talk about. Never. If somebody asks me for that, I say I'm not there's nothing for me to send to you. That's not how it works. And if I were to try to figure out where the conversation is going to go before it goes or try to timestamp it as we go along like, "Oh, that was a really good part. I could maybe mark that in the editor or something." I can't even do that. I can't
mm,
bring myself to do that because this is like, the analogy I'm thinking of in the moment is like there's some great albums. There's some great songs out there, but there's some really great albums. And the artist want really their intention was not to sell you the 99-cent song on iTunes or to get you to stream the one song. They wanna give you the whole thing, right? The whole
mm,
album from beginning to end. And that takes more of a commitment from the listener as well. And so I'm interested in these conversations because they build rapport between me and the guest and the audience to hear way more insightful and learn about that person and start to build a relationship with the person behind the technology that doesn't happen in a minute long clip. It just can't, right? It might be a gateway into the longer conversation, but I find that often isn't the case because people are just doom scrolling, right? And they just keep seeing these minute long clips or whatever TikTok length currently is, that's optimized for engagement. I don't buy into that stuff as much. I really feel like you settle in, like turn it on during your commute and just listen to the whole thing. And I've actually kind of pushed away from that short form content thing because it's kind of a trap from a creator's if one does really well, like these algorithmic platforms, they even game you as the content creator, right? When you upload your first one and it gets tons of engagement and it's like, "Oh my god, I should do more of that," right?
mm,
It's just to get you to do more of that. It's often not even the case that they're going to continue to put that video in front of a lot of people and get the kind of quote unquote engagement that you got on that first one. So it's 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 partially me protecting myself of just my sanity, right? Not not any IP or anything. Just sanity wise to not get into that trap because that is a full-time job. I mean, obviously I could outsource that and I could maybe outsource it to technology, but um there's one of those like trade-offs like you mentioned earlier, right? Like it actually is a huge time commitment to get into that game of creating short form content from your long stuff. Can it be done? Absolutely. You have everything there you need to do it, but it's a you have to kind of weigh the true cost of what it takes to do that.
mm. Nice. And even can you walk us through how a typical sponsorship discussion looks like? And I'll share like a bit. So I've been approached 2 3 times for sponsorship, and I have around like 2,000 subscribers on YouTube. But the average view count is 50 to 150, and in podcast also it varies depending on the guest. So sometimes I underestimate or question myself: is this a good enough audience for a sponsor? Am I giving the value they want? If they sponsor my, so I had that self doubt. Like how? So, what are your thoughts and yeah?
My thoughts on that are you creating something that you want to partner with somebody, like the value is there for both sides, right? Like for me, that was one of the reasons why I wanted to create a professional product, right? Is because I want to attract professional sponsors, whether that's through I offer a couple different ways for people to do that. They could do ads on my podcast, and a lot of people are allergic to ads. I also have an option where people can buy a membership to my
Mm,
podcast and get an ad-free version if they want to support me that way. So I'm giving people kind of options for ways to support the show for it to continue to operate as it does, but ads versus ad free. And then another option I have is like what I call a branded partner episode, which is much more about kind of the messaging that they want to get across. And so sometimes I'll have an episode where it's totally about their product, but I also am very good about weaving in the people side of
mm,
that as well, right? So numbers is a hard game in podcasting. You are only doing video, right? And so if you have it on YouTube, the YouTube analytics system is incredible. It is miles ahead of anything on podcasting side of things. That being said, people don't go to YouTube for long form video content.
mm,
Like I said earlier, they might have it running in a tab in the background and listening to it, but YouTube has never been set up for long form video content like movies, right? People, and even you can see it all over with TikTok, with Instagram, and with YouTube Shorts. It's all about trying to get everybody into the minute or less content strategy. And so that doesn't really line up with what I'm doing, and it doesn't line up with what you're doing here, right? So then we start to look at podcasting and analytics and subscribers and number of downloads within a certain time period. And again, that becomes just kind of this weird game because of people are often comparing it to like legacy media.
mm,
If you've got subscribers to your magazine or to your newspaper, right? And where they would have placed an ad on a half of a page or a full page ad in a magazine, and that magazine has 100,000 subscribers. I'm saying that in air quotes, right? Like, yeah, the magazine goes out to 100,000 people, but how many people throw it in the trash? A lot, right? Right. So it's not that different for podcasting, right? It's like, yeah, you subscribe to the podcast, but it still may go unlistened to, right? And
mm,
so then people want to know, well, how many people actually click through the call to action URL and go to the landing page? And that's not my URL. It's their URL. It's my
mm,
sponsor's URL. So I don't even have that information, right? So I mean, it's so tricky. It's super tricky. And so to me, it really becomes about like, have you established something valuable for both sides, right? And how do you start to put numbers on that? I don't know the answer to that. Like I pick a number and that's where I start. And so how many people show up for your show or stream it later? Like that's an indicator, right? But it's not an indicator of value.
mm,
It is in one regard, right? Like number of people who watch the show is an indicator of value. But the content likely is more valuable than that. It becomes kind of a marketing thing for you, right? How do you get more people to show to understand that there's something valuable there that they should tune into? Um, and I think, if you have a valuable audience who is interested in trying new technology, for example, then you have to try to find tech
mm,
partners who are willing to spend some money to meet those people at your show, right? That to me is something that the Troxel podcast has been really amazing at, is really defining an audience that is valuable across the board in AEC. And what I mean by across the board is users who do production to decision makers at the top of the food chain in the firms themselves, right? People who implement, who decide to actually write the check to purchase some technology platform, right? And so that to me, like where else can you find that? There's other places you can find that, but if you want to get in front of that audience every week for a month or for a quarter or for a year, my podcast is a great place to do that. And so I've created something valuable there by creating valuable content. Like it's just this cycle, right? And so my constant ask on the show is please subscribe to the show, right?
Mm,
It's free. Doesn't you like it's free because there's ads, right? You can choose to pay and go that route too, ad free. But then that to me is an indication to sponsors that there's people there, like that they're spending their money to reach real people. And so I think in AEC, that's one of the more difficult things to do is just to get somebody to click that subscribe button,
mm,
even though it doesn't cost anything. Like people don't have time for that, it seems, right? And it that is a difficult, like I should have no shame asking every single episode, hey, click that subscribe button. It really does help. How does it help? It helps this show be a show, right? If there
mm,
was no clicking of the subscribe buttons, there wouldn't be a show anymore because it's not sustainable, right? So it all kind of comes back to that sustainability aspect. And so for you, just keep asking. Like it's so annoying, right, to watch YouTube videos and click that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. They're doing it because it's the only way they can survive, right? And so for an audience member to recognize that they truly are helping you do the thing that you do by doing that is really important, right? And so don't have any shame asking for it. And then when sponsors show up and they want to potentially, they want to explore and they want numbers and they want, information to make that decision, it really does help to have those people subscribe. So, I mean, it is interesting. The power really is in the audience's hands when it comes to
mm.
that because they're the ones either clicking subscribe or holding back from doing that. And so, I mean, if whoever's watching this right now, like do that. Do that to Mayur's show. Like click the button. You're helping him even if he's not taking sponsors right now. Like this is something if it will help him be more sustainable in that if he has data to show those people to actually do it. It same goes for my show, right? It's like just this constant ask and I feel like I'm nagging people, but at the same time, like I can't not do it or else the show won't continue.
Damn, that was such a sweet pitch and message. I I think for me personally, the metric or like thing which motivates me to double down on podcasting, like occasionally once in a few weeks or months, I hear a message like this particular episode was really insightful. Your content is
Mhm.
making a difference.
Yeah.
So that just intrinsic gives motivation. Like so, I'm pretty
Great.
sure.
Yeah, it's fuel. It's fuel, right? For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
do you have any like bucket list of guest you wanted on your show which you haven't interviewed?
Always, I always have people who I would love to have on the show. I think conceptually, without naming any specific names at the present, is I did I've done 2 shows, which I call my campfire series, and the campfire series is like true storytelling of like the OG. Like I had Brad Shell from SketchUp. He invented SketchUp and he's a great storyteller and he went through the entire history of how SketchUp became a thing, right? This ubiquitous tool that so many people love and that so many people hate, right? For various reasons. Um but just to hear that story and to like pull little insights for people like yourself who are creating products out there, like what did it take to get something so popular out into the world? It didn't start so popular, right? It became
Mm,
that over time. But what were the like the magic moments in that process? So that series to me has so much potential because it's number one, it's really great for storytelling, right? There's decades worth of we can totally cherry pick the moments that happened looking backward of how this thing became. So when it comes to the biggest names in software and technology in AEC tech, those are the kinds of stories I'm really drawn to try to get those. And those are probably the hardest people to get on the show because a lot of them have retired at this point, or they're not interested in doing anything in this space anymore. Or but like with Brad, I just emailed him. I said, "Hey Brad, would you?" I found him on LinkedIn. I'm like, "Would you be willing to tell the story?" And he right away he was like, "Yeah, sure." And then it took us 6 months to nail down a time to actually schedule, and so there's a lot of patience involved in that process as well. But that was I've heard so many great responses to that episode, even though, it was just retelling of a history, but it was retelling of a history that most people didn't know, right? SketchUp went through a huge, like, adventure, right, to become owned by Trimble now, right? Started out in Boulder, Colorado. He was a structural engineer. Then it went to Google, right? They sold it to Google. Google ended up selling it to Trimble, right? And like there's so many steps in between there. Like what got it to its MVP? Like what were the five features that were the minimum viable product for SketchUp? How did they decide what those were going to be? And he was so gracious in giving credit to the people who were like just the geniuses behind this tool and this idea and this concept. And so I think that was episode 144. If anybody wants to look it up on Troxel podcast. But it was Campfire series, the SketchUp story with Brad Shell, and it's just it's really fun to have those episodes because like they're not looking for exposure. They're just looking to tell a good story, and for it to be memorialized, right? As like that's super important to know where we've come from in AEC tech. And so those are kind of my bucket list guests, and the usual suspects in software and tech in AEC. I want to talk to them.
that's yeah, like I think those wisdoms creates a different level of inspiration. Like you, right now you see like this software used by most of the people, but they were also struggling at some point getting users, or there were
Hmm.
like opportunities. I was like in a New York AC Tech event, and there was someone from early days of Revit sharing amazing stories that okay, this is how like like there was also a strategy to make it like branding wise, adoption wise, what made a big difference for Revit, why it's so widely adopted today was
Yeah.
because of those strategies.
Right. Yeah. And what's hard for me is like I'll have guests on like Marty Rosmanith. He came on from Schema AI, right? And he was on the original Revit team. And you get a little bit of the Revit story in there, but not the whole Revit story, right? So like I want to get the whole Revit. Like why not? The people would love to hear that, right? Because then you understand more about it, I think. And then but you can also apply those lessons learned, those hard lessons on the path to getting something out there that is this huge success. It's not an overnight success. It took 20 years or 10 years or whatever it took to get there. What were those hard lessons that they learned along the way? Like those are so valuable to people because they're timeless lessons, right? They happen over and over and over again. Why? Because it's my first time to learn this lesson. It's their fifth time learning that lesson, right? So I think that there's so much value in those, and that's why those are truly kind of the bucket list type people that I would love to have on this show because they can share such valuable stories and insights that people are still dealing with today.
Mm. Have you considered hosting people of failed startups in AC? with Katera.
Oh, interesting. Well, I haven't been pitched that yet, so that's a cool idea. Are people willing to talk about their failures? I think there are people who are willing to talk about their failures. But I don't think they go out looking to tell those stories, right? They kind of need to be approached and say like, "No, there's some valuable lessons in there, right? Of what didn't work."
Mhm.
So I think that's a fantastic idea for sure.
Yeah, most of the people moved on into working another company. Like, and one interesting thing I sometimes discover as a podcaster is like there's always like a a group who like then diverge to make different amazing companies.
Right.
uh so like early NBBJ days, and like also I think Case Group, where they went to
Oh
WeWork,
yeah.
and now
All
like
kinds of things.
Federico is doing his own. So like you can trace sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of those people have been on the podcast to talk about what they're doing now. And again, there's little sprinklings of their trajectory through that process, but not the whole story, right? And so to really focus on those stories, I think is really fun because it people like to tell they it like fires off these nostalgic, you know, there's just these cool connections that happen in your brain when that happens, and you think about, back in the old days, right? And you remember the good stuff, like, but there's also some difficulties that were overcome, and that to me is super valuable.
Nice. So even I like monitor a lot of like tech trends in AEC, be it
Mhm.
startups, and I could derive some like meta analysis that okay, with Gen AI, there's a lot of saturation in like early stage design. We have like a lot of tools in that, but not enough tools in like construction detail, DD stage. So from your hosting of various guests, do you sometimes feel there is concentration of ideas in some section, but there's still some areas of opportunities?
Absolutely. One of the, I think, more difficult pills for us to swallow is that the money follows the trends and the buzzwords. Right? And so, I mean, with 3D Guru, right? It's like AI, 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 AI. Have you heard of AI? Oh yeah, AI. It's all there is, right? And then people who were doing things that were algorithms or generative design is now called AI, right? Because you have to. And that to me is frustrating because it skips over, and I'm curious from your point of view because we just saw this at Autodesk University with their announcements about Autodesk AI and the Autodesk Assistant and stuff. And the story there really was the mundane stuff. It was like the boring stuff. And they just came out and said it like we want to tackle the boring stuff because and I feel like there's so much disregarding of the boring stuff, which is what would actually help the architect and the contractor and the engineer on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's a sound strategy, but I'm curious from your standpoint, like thinking about it from like opportunities across the board and people picking the buzzword opportunities to pursue because they have investors to make happy who maybe aren't even in the building industry, right? They just want to know that they're getting a return on their investment. I think it is leaving a lot of holes in there, but then we see a big company like Autodesk that's a public company that has to perform for its investors, for its owners, right? That they're actually saying we're going to go for the boring in quotes boring and mundane stuff so that you can actually do better work. So what do you think when it comes to that?
I have an amazing story to share on this. So in 3D Guru's first version, we made like a web-based tool where you can
Hmm.
type any text and create a 3D model on the fly, or create a house with 2 rooms and you get 3D assets on the fly. It was targeted for designers. We were like we tried VC it out, and we were also talking to designers on the side. From like coming from design background, making money from designer is super difficult.
Yeah.
And we were making like web based with modeling, and like even if like designer has like one less editing feature. They're like, we're not gonna migrate from Photoshop or traditional tools. So their feature set requirements for migration is high. And for me to build like fully CAD like AI model on the web, it's like at least 2 years to validate. So I thought, okay, it's high risk and difficult to monetizable audience, and VCs are always looking for unicorn things. And like, so I can easily do the math. Okay, what's the appetite for designers to pay for those tools? Is it $1 billion? And then I, okay, then we did pivots. Okay, rather than like B2 designers, let's do B2B, where it's big businesses have budgets. And again, I realized there is a limited set of like ENR firms or big firms who would be ready to pay, and the sales cycle and everything is high. And then, okay, we also thought, okay, let's do a B2 direct end customers, where okay, we have trained this AI model that can do interior design uh, intelligence, but the customers right now who are doing Pinterest search and everything don't have the mindset to pay. They're like, okay, we are getting this free inspiration and other thing. And it's like, okay, how do you then you learn this skill and train the AI model and intelligence to do design? Designer architects are bad market to monetize. Customers, end users don't have the appetite, and they're so then we had another like, can we do a B2B to C? So we then partnered with e-commerce marketplace to sell interior design, where this software is for free, but like we can help them narrow down what are the better house choices, furniture, and everything. So a lot of pivot stories, because over time you'd identify good problem to have, but if the end users doesn't have the appetite to
Mhm.
pay. So in AC, I find a lot of technical challenging problems, but no one is ready to pay for kind of problems.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that it's a you nailed it, right? It's interesting because like I'm talking about on my podcast how I can't even get an architect to click the subscribe button, which which is free, right? And you're trying to attract them to pay for a piece of software to do their job better. And a thought that's come up many times is that architects should not have to pay for their software to do the design. I mean, this is just, you could conceptually follow this argument, which is the people who do the work shouldn't have to pay for the software because we are actually specifying millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars of building products, right? That's sales. That's where sales happens in the design process is when the contractor purchases the goods to build the building. Buildings are made of thousands and thousands and thousands of building products and assemblies and components. And, you know, architects have to specify that stuff. Engineers specify the HVAC and the lighting controls and the fire sprinklers. And, you could think about it as like basically we're we're the cook in the kitchen, right? And we're using all of the elements to that are written in the recipe to create this delicious meal, which is our building, right? And do we really need to pay for the software to do that when the money is actually made in the goods side of things, right? I think it's really interesting that more building product manufacturers are not seeing that opportunity because they can make friends for life by basically paying for like, if building product companies, you look at their budgets for the year for marketing, they're enormous, right? It depends on the company, of course, but there's the usual suspects that show up to every AI conference and have the biggest booths, right? And they're spending tons of money to get in front of architects there. What if they just took that money and put it towards developing software to make the actual architect's life easier, right? Better. And that would be incredible. I think it would be a huge opportunity. It's a huge missed opportunity that exists in the world today because design professionals could focus more on design and they would have a better bottom line because man, the software bills are super high. They're huge, right? So just apply those marketing budgets over there to software development. I think that would and you'd be serving your clients as a building product manufacturer even though, like, I'm not really your client, the owners would be, but it's helping you get to those owners ultimately. So I think that there's some big opportunities in there that could change the game totally.
Yeah, like you hit the nail. Like I think what I'm seeing with the trends with AI, with like all these co-pilots, the cost to make a software is
Mhm.
going like down, drastically down. Like now, two people can make amazing piece of software, or like you would, and that makes me think like there's an opportunity of vertical SaaS, where like
Mhm.
let's say if for the end manufacturer, they can build like okay configurable components, designer friendly, and maybe first layer is okay integrate architect, but then if the end consumer who wants to like use it, there's also they can use the design expertise through their AI model and just get that product. So I think one thing I learned the hard way like is like how for whenever the card or payment is done, the closer your software is towards the last part, the higher monetizable like opportunity it is.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah. So any idea you personally, if you had more time or like to tinker, what would you build?
Absolutely. I mean, I've tinkered with the idea for a long time, which is to create a better resource from my podcast episodes that were more insightful for people who maybe don't have time to listen to the whole thing, right? So creating that short form, maybe it's readable content, maybe it's not video, maybe it is, I don't know, but for those really busy decision makers out there, like what are the actionable insights? What are the trends? You know, there's I you could think of it being sliced up in different ways for people like that, but also then to link across multiple episodes. Like I said, the data's there and ready to be used. It's just finding, and I think we're getting close if it doesn't already exist, right? With AI and with RAG models and things like that to actually start to create the interface to do that, but then also maybe to that still takes a user interaction, and if I can't get somebody to even click a subscribe button, am I really gonna get them to go to a website or whatever and type in a question? I kinda doubt it, right? So maybe it starts to become even more of an insight engine of just like, what should people be asking about? What would they be naturally interested in hearing about? And just to start deriving that information from this huge lake of information. You know, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not a lot of information, right? It's 170 episodes of transcripts. It's not that big, but there's a lot of great stuff in there, and I think that it would be useful and meaningful to a lot of people to be able to do that. So that's just a an example of the kind of a tool that I could see building on top of an already existing resource just to kind of get because people like I don't expect anybody to have the time every week to listen to an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours of an episode. There are definitely people who can do that and they do it all the time, but the window for that opportunity, I'm competing against the other podcasts out there for that, right?
Mm,
And so um, it really comes down to, like, who the guest is sometimes and who the what the title of the episode is, and are they willing to listen to it? Whereas I think there's opportunities to kind of increase the chances of people listening if they get something insightful, and even if they don't listen, they still get something insightful from the conversation without an hour of long form, uh, listening to have to do that step.
yeah. And I must say your podcast title are so good that it definitely makes me wanna listen or at least save
Good,
for
good to hear it.
yeah. It's a great thing you've done. And when you were sharing, it just gave me an idea. So we are moving towards hyper personalization with AI. What if for the transcript you have, I can go to your website and I just select a persona, BIM manager, CXO, designer, and
Mhm.
then I can only give snippets for what they might be interested or episodes filter out with
That's a cool
the
idea. I like that. I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna steal that idea. I'm just gonna write it down on my list of things I wish I could do, but I probably won't. So I won't really steal your idea, but I love that. I love the idea of like personas because there are many different personas who are listening to the show for different reasons, right? And
Mm,
they're going to get different things out of it than the other one. And so why not tailor it to them? I think that's a great
yeah,
idea.
yeah. And especially speaking when you're working in your previous role as director of design tech, how were you evaluating software, which one to adopt and which one to not? Question A. And for startup founders who wants to get into firms like yours when you're working, what's a good go-to market strategy?
Oh, man. You know, the team that I had put together really drove what we looked at and why we looked at it, right? It was all about just solving problems in the firm or recognizing in our firm with how many people it had and how many offices and teams, what could we do to bring, I hate to say standardization, but what could we do to really unify the firm in different ways? And that's kind of where we started, right? And so it was the big ticket items that you would content management, detail libraries, specifications. It was like the stuff that nobody actually wants to deal with. That was the stuff that we had to deal with in the beginning, templates for Revit, where do we get our content? How do we structure our content? And so we went through the process quite often of what's called choosing by advantage. And so there's always going to be competition in a space for whatever the category of software that you're looking at. And so it just becomes like this process that we would go through to pick the one that, and oftentimes I would say it had to do with like the interaction of the team with the developers of the software or their customer satisfaction team or their integration team, however you want to label that. But that relationship of people behind the software had a huge impact. And so I think that's harder for small teams who are developing software, right? Because you're basically holding the hand of your clients and you only have so much time to do that because you're also doing development and features and marketing and so I understand why that's difficult to even be maybe on the list of choosing by advantage. But I think when you're in a larger organization, an enterprise organization that has more budget to spend on things to make their employees' lives easier, like you've got to get to a level where you can do that hand holding so that you can actually get your foot in the door, or else you're not going to make it to the top of that list. Um, it's a catch 22 for sure. I don't know, there we've seen SaaS companies go the other direction, right? Like Dropbox back in the early days, right? Where it's just like shadow IT, right? It's just like just go straight to the user, and the user, because it's so hard to share a file in an organization with somebody outside of your organization. Oh, well, I have admin rights on my laptop. I'm just going to install Dropbox and make it easy for myself. And they got tons and tons and tons of users by doing that, without having to go through the IT department. But in an enterprise organization like that shit is locked down, right? Like you
Mm,
can't do that kind of stuff, right? So you have to go through the appropriate steps. And I think that we're in a different world than how Dropbox was back in the day. But now we're seeing it happen through with the web interface. Like if I can just go to, you know, whatever website and just do it through the browser, that's a new way of working that starts to, again, it's kind of shadow IT, right? Because it doesn't necessarily follow the protocols of data governance. It doesn't follow the protocols of like there's so many legal requirements as a licensed professional that we have to follow with certain clients. It gets really weird really fast, right? But we see companies do that because the browser is a formidable delivery path, right? So um, I don't know. I don't know really where I'm going with that other than like it's a tough world. There's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of vetting. There's a lot of just ignoring of what's out there because our plates are already overfull in the firm, right? Just trying to deal with the problems that we have, not looking for new problems. And that's hard because you've got great solutions and you've got ways to save time and ways to save money. And at the same time, like I can't even get my head above water to even think about it. So I really feel like it's through the relationship side of things that you can make the biggest impact on your own bottom line. And that's difficult, I think, for some software developers because they're not people persons, right? They don't
Mm.
go, they're not really out there charismatic, shaking hands and kissing babies and meeting for lunch and just doing whatever they can to get in front of an actual person, right? Because it's a huge time commitment. But at the same time, like my success, I feel like in my roles that I've done over the many years has really come down to communication skills, right? And the way you develop communication skills is by talking to people all the time. And as a designer, trying to make decisions on what this building is going to be that was boot camp for what I do now, right? That was boot camp for podcasting, to having conversations with C-level executives and users who are trying to get the newest Grasshopper script to be adopted by the company, right? Like, how do we get all those people to talk? My boot camp was working with cities, working with clients, working with school districts, working with boards of education, working like that to me was really what helped me become successful as a communicator. On your toes, presentations over and over and over again, getting people to build consensus on their own team so that we knew what to do for them, right? All of those things are software developers who are developing products need to do that kind of work as well. Like, you're doing an amazing job here because you are getting out and talking to people. You're developing those skills just by doing it. That's what you have to do to be able to talk to people and ask good questions and actually get the insights and have the relationship to say, like, when I see you in person at the next AIA conference, like, I know that's Mayur. Like, let's grab a selfie, let's grab a coffee, let's talk about what you're working on, because you've done the legwork to establish the connection and therefore, the beginnings of a relationship.
I see. So the tip is put efforts in communicating, meet in person. But I also realize there are some industries like construction or agri where conferences are where you build a lot of relationships and then continue. Like, it's hard to trust a person who is constantly DMing you on LinkedIn or cold emailing you to adopt
Totally.
their software versus like
Yeah.
a networking at a AIA and then like, oh, let me check it out later.
Everybody
Yeah.
everybody has a version of that they're just super annoying to them, right? It's like DMs on LinkedIn or cold emails or whatever. It's not easy, but you really have to meet people where they're at, and you have to think about their industry. Like, if you think about the architectural profession, just that segment of AEC, it's still a very relationship based business, right? And so if that's the basis of how business happens, right? Referrals, word of mouth, return clients, people who like school districts, hospitals who just constantly building, it's all about the relationships. It's all about the relationships. It's actually, you have to plug into that paradigm, because if
Mm,
you don't plug into that, you come in from a different angle. I don't have time for that, right? So yeah, I gave you a really long answer of like choosing software and choosing by design, but you know, when it really comes down to it, it's like, who do you want to work with? And that's a relationship question, right? Your software can be incredible. If it's a pain in the ass for me to like get tech support or whatever, right? Make it easy for me to say yes. Make it very, and that usually comes down to like, oh, I need to talk to Meyer. I need to talk to somebody about this, and that to me is, in this industry, that's pretty much how it works.
yeah. That's a great insight. Double down on relationship, customer support. Even if it's not the best software, you'll have higher adoption. Yeah.
I think so. And if it doesn't come easy, you have to practice doing that, right? If anything like that is difficult, and it doesn't matter what the thing is, if you get better by doing it. Like, I tell my 18-year-old this all the time. Like, we went rock climbing last night, and it's been a couple weeks since we've been to the climbing gym, and he was so defeated because he just felt weak. He's like, "I feel so weak. I just can't do I look at that climb, and I should just be able to do it." And it's like, well, the only way you can do it is by doing it, right? You have to show up, and you have to practice. There's a really, great book. There's an author who's written a couple of books. His name is Stephen Pressfield, and one of the books is called The War of Art. So not The Art of War, right, which is another famous book, but
Yeah.
he flipped it, The War of Art, and another one called Do the Work, both by Stephen Pressfield. And they're all about building the muscles so that when the time comes, you're ready for it, right? And so if you're just stepping into a situation cold and you don't have the practice, whether it's having a conversation with somebody, knowing the tools to build relationships with people, how do you relate to people, what do they want to talk about, what do they not want to talk about, it's all of those kinds of things that you really have to practice for so that you can show up effectively when the time arises.
Yeah. So true. I know we are at 1 hour mark. Even what is one thing which we didn't cover in this interview, and you would like to end on that note and share the message?
Wow, I feel like that flew by. That was a fast hour, which is, kudos to a good conversation. uh I don't I I don't really have anything else that I was really wanting to talk about. Hit that subscribe button right now. Everybody who's out there, hit that. Help out the people who are trying to do something in this industry. I think one of the things that I hope people will do is care, that there are people out there who actually care and are trying to do something useful and valuable. And so, we already touched on that in this episode, but I'll just double down on that. It's like, show that you care. If you don't care, like, fine. But if you do, like, you actually help the content creators in your industry do the thing that's helping your industry in whatever way that they're doing that. So that's my call to action for the audience today.
Amazing. It was lovely hosting you, Ivan. Definitely, I think most of my audience is following TRXL podcast. So thanks for again for being on the show and for your time.